I've been involved with my colleague, Valérie Felchen, in the definition of the objectives of land take mitigation in Luxembourg that Bob Wheeler will present after me. But now I'm sorry to say it, but I will not really focus on the Luxembourg context. I would like more to share general research reflections that emerged from this experience. And I will try to show the potential pitfalls that may arise from the definition of quantified objectives, which do not really take enough into account the territorial context with their demographic and economic specificities. So some elements might be a bit redundant with what has been said before, but some others hopefully will be complementary. So the impacts of land take have already been evoked by Marie-Josée Vidal before, so I will not spend a lot of time on it. I just wanted to say that this concern is quite recent, but considered more and more seriously since approximately 20 years. And this is partly due to some alert raisers, such as Jonathan Foley, author of a very cited paper about land use change, published in Science, who considers, as you can read, the consequences of land use change as being really one of the most significant impacts of humans on the world's biosphere. And we can see a very significant increase in the number of academic papers published on this issue. And the very well-named super project presented earlier demonstrates this once again, I think. So first, a few figures. According to the Korean Land Cover Project, which allows to apprehend the phenomenon of land use change at the European scale, 1,000 square kilometers of land have been artificialized in Europe each year between 2000 and 2006. This rhythm has decreased to 540 square kilometers yearly between 2012 and 2018. But we also have to notice that the relative growth of the urbanized surface between 1950 and 2005 with 78% is much higher than the relative growth of the population with only 33%, according to the European Environment Agency. So this means that the growth of land take is not only linked to the demographic growth, of course, but also to the changes in our lifestyles. And between 2000 and 2018, 78% of land take was at the expense of agricultural areas. So land artificialization primarily affects agricultural production. But what do these figures really mean? And I totally share the point of view of David Evers. And I think that there is really a strong need for clarification of the terms that are used. Because if we don't really know what we are precisely talking about, how can we define relevant objectives in terms of land take mitigation? So first of all, land take, sometimes also called land consumption or land artificialization, refers to the increase of artificial surfaces, such as housing areas, urban areas, industrial, commercial, and transport units, road and rail networks, and this over time. So you see that it encompasses very different types of land uses with very different intensities of artificialization. But I will come back on this point in a minute. Another notion is soil sealing, which seems apparently to be more objective. And the report commissioned by the EU gives the following definition of it. Sealed soils can be defined as the destruction or covering of soils by building, constructions, and layers of completely or partly impermeable artificial material, such as asphalt, concrete, and so on. So really the physical properties of the soil are modified and rainwater can no longer be absorbed. And when we speak about soil that is sealed by buildings, roads, or parkings, it's always less extended than the surface considered as being artificial, which also encompasses, as said before, gardens, parks, etc. And the last notion is the one of the building of land plots. And it's a more administrative approach, which primary focus is to monitor the evolution of the land resource that is available for new buildings. So these notions, which are often confused, do not refer to the exactly same phenomena. But if we come back to the notion of land take, which is the one that has been chosen by the European Commission in the definition of its no-net land take objective, it can really be misleading. And first of all, land is not really taken. It's just used in another manner, as already said by David Evers. And speaking of land artificialization implies then that the surface that is considered was previously, by contrast, natural. But it's clear to me that these categories of natural and artificial are too simplistically opposed. Indeed, a cultivated field or a forest managed for short-term wood production are considered, with the tools that are used to monitor land take, as being natural, whereas they are often planted and managed to be highly productive. And they are far from having the same attributes of naturality as other areas that are preserved for their biodiversity. Inversely, some green urban environments that are considered as artificial can host twice as many species of plants as arable lands or forests that are planted for wood production. So the notion of land take induces a kind of dichotomous perspective, which simplifies the complexity of what really happens on the ground. However, the EU chose this term for its no-net land take objective by 2050. And despite the scientific doubts that I have just mentioned, in a way, I do think that it stays a quite efficient communication tool to make people sensitive to the general issues of biodiversity and agricultural losses. I think also that it's important to know from where does this objective come from. The notion of land take has been largely popularized in Europe by the Korean Land Cover Project. And it's with this project that we started to have regular updates about the intensity of land use change at the European level, thanks to remote sensing and satellite images. And then this indicator of monitoring became a political objective. But the indicator of land take seen through the Korean Land Cover Project present strong pitfalls when it is used as an objective. So first of all, that accuracy is not consistent over time, which makes the evaluation of the dynamic quite problematic. The evolution of satellite sensors sometimes induces biases in the quantification of land cover changes. The monitoring of land use change with Korean land cover is not also very reliable at a local or at a regional scale, since the resolution is not fine enough. And most of all, and considered alone, that is to say independently from other indicators, such as demography, the indicator of land take does not provide any element of explanation of what really happens. However, this indicator has been, the indicator of no-net land take by 2050 has been defined as a policy objective by the European Commission in the publication titled Roadmap to a Resource-Efficient Europe. And it's important to mention that this objective is a community one. That is to say that it's not binding and defined at national or regional scale. Yet, several countries or regions have already defined their own quantified objective at such scales, such as in the following example that you can see on the slide. So let's see now how it's possible to interpret in different and even in contrasting ways the results of a comparative analysis about land take in Europe. And I think that showing the contradictions between the results obtained with different land take indicators shows how important it is to design objectives that really make sense. So on this map, you see the relative growth of the artificialized surface per country in relative terms over the period 2000 and 2006. So the data are a bit old, but does not affect the message. It shows how important is the growth of the artificial surface during this period, not in absolute, but in relative figures. And you see here that the countries where this growth has been very important in dark brown are Spain and Ireland. And it gives the feeling that these countries are bad performers, in contrast with Poland, Slovakia, Romania, or Belgium, for instance, which appear as good performers. But if we consider now the amount of artificial surface per capita in 2000, that is to say before the previous observation period, we obtain a map which is almost at the opposite of the first one. So in this map, no evolution is shown. Here, Spain, with less than 300 square meters of artificial surface per capita in 2000, appears as one of the best performer, while the previous slide showed that Spain was the worst performers in terms of land take. On the contrary, Romania, Bulgaria, Finland, and Sweden appear as being very artificialized when considered in relation with their population. So in fact, what this comparison of maps shows is that most often the countries in which the land take dynamic was the lowest over the observation period are the ones which had already and previously artificialized the most their land. So this map offers a very different reading of the phenomenon. And it's clear that for the country which had in 2000 a lot of artificial surface per capita, the potential to mitigate land take is much higher than for the other countries. Now on this slide, you see a map which shows the relative growth of the number of square meter of artificialized surface per capita over the same period. And you see here that Eastern European countries, which have shown a low level of absolute land take, appear as the worst performers in red. But this is not because they have seen a high increase in the artificialized surface, but because they have been confronted to a decrease in their overall number of inhabitants. And it's clear that fast developing countries in terms of demography have less capacity to stop land take than countries confronted to a population decline. But most of all, it shows also that all these countries cannot be considered with the same indicators. So you see that depending on the way we try to apprehend the phenomenon and to link it with other variables, the results and the ranking between the good and bad performers can be totally opposed. There is no simple indicator to assess the performance of different territories in managing their land resources. And this underlines the importance of defining objectives which make sense and which are tailored to the national, regional, and even local context. In other words, there can be no one-size-fits-all way of dealing with land take. This being said, indicators or quantified objectives remain, to my point of view, very important, since they allow implementing objectives which otherwise would probably remain just wishful thinking. And they also help to raise the awareness regarding the problems that we all collectively face. So we have tried to define with the Ministry for Energy and Spatial Planning in Luxembourg quantified objectives at the local scale, which make sense and which are coherent with other sectorial policies. And it's not, of course, an easy task, especially in an extremely fast developing country. We have tried to articulate the land take mitigation objective with other crucial issues, and it's fundamental that local policymakers also do so. So first, in which spatial context should spatial development be concentrated, and where should it be avoided? We believe that priority in terms of development should be given to places that are already well equipped in terms of urban amenity and public transportation. Second, with what impact in terms of new inhabitants and jobs should urban development be allowed? Another element, of course, is at which social cost should land take be mitigated. If land available for construction is reduced, the risk of a huge increase of land prices and consequently of housing costs is very important. And as you know, housing prices have already increased in a totally unsustainable manner in Europe for the social cohesion. So it's crucial to take into account this point and to find a good balance between these objectives by allowing the production of housing, but in a sustainable, of course, and dense manner. The architectural quality of the new projects should also, of course, be considered. The definition of purely quantitative objectives should not be at the expense of the urban integration of new projects. And last but not least, densification in already very dense urban areas can increase the urban heat island phenomenon. So the negative externalities of densification should also be considered, especially in already dense urban areas. So the list of topics to be considered could be for sure extended, but I will stop now to try to stay on time. Thank you for your attention.